Hi, guys.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hey, Megan.
Hi, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Good afternoon.
Deborah, I have a quick question as we get started.
Sure.
Is there a way, are you able to edit our names? I have an E on the end of Anne.
Oh, yes,
so
I
was
can.
Wondering about.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Classic Anne with an E.
There you go.
Look, there you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry about that.
Has Commissioner Lamb texted anybody?
What's that, Commissioner?
Has Commissioner Lamb?
She is. She's trying. She had something wrong with her video, so she was going into her settings to check them and then log back on.
Okay, thanks.
So she'll be here any minute.
But Debbie, while
Yes?
we're talking about names, I think mine's supposed to be Rock Hudson. You know?
I can name you whatever you want, Mike.
Can you get that fixed?
Do you want me to?
Harry
No, I got enough problems already.
There she is.
Hi, y'all. I think my video, I haven't figured out how to, sorry, y'all. I'm not gonna be able to turn on my videos in the settings, but it's for whatever reason, it is not. Apologies for being a couple minutes late.
Okay.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Recording in progress.
Happy New Year, Commissioner.
Commissioner Lamb, real quick before we get started, might I ask Deborah?
Recording
it looks like Edwin may not have received the panelist invite, or he couldn't find it in his inbox. Would you mind resending that to him?
Sure. He's on, so I'm going to promote him.
Also, Laini.
He's on as an attendee.
Laini as well.
Laini.
Matamity.
Okay. I don't see her on, so let me do that.
Thank you for both elevating and for elevating Laini. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Come on.
I'll just wait another 30 seconds.
Hold on one sec, Commissioner. I'm trying to get it. My mouse isn't working on my, I've been having computer problems also. Yesterday, my keyboard wouldn't work. Today, my mouse won't work. No, that's not the right one. Shoot, where is it? No, come on.
I'll just go ahead and get started since
Okay.
we do have 3 informational items. And thank you to the public for your patience. So I like to call to
Recording
order
in progress.
the meeting of the Budget and Business Services for Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. And Happy New Year to everyone and first week back from winter break. Please note the committee members, Deborah, of all who are present, and no other commissioners are present as well. And Section A is general information regarding the
Thank you.
meeting of the board, and just wanted to welcome Chief Wallace, Deputy Superintendent Lee, Director Gordon, and district staff and members of the public. Today we have 3 informational items, and at this time I'd like to call the first standing the first standing informational item, which is the fiscal year 2021-22 Budget Business Services Committee calendar. And I believe that's Anne Marie Gordon.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Lamb.
Where is that? Hold on one second. Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank the budget staff again for the tremendous work before the closure of the calendar year and submitting our required balancing plan and our first interim to the California Department of Education. Also want to appreciate my colleagues in working with the superintendent around moving forward, particularly in the next several months around as we advance through the budgeting process for the rest of the year.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, this is our standing item, reviewing what we have discussed already in the Budget and Business Services Committee and what we have coming over the duration of this fiscal year and school year. So I actually think there is one slide before this. If you're able to go back one. There we go. So this is our running record of our meeting agendas for BDS. You can see today the focus is the PEEF evaluation report and the equity and arts resolution update. As we move through the year, we update this with what we anticipate coming up in future meetings, and then also what we cover and what we have covered, so that as we get through the year, we have a good record and we can see all of the different items that we cover and discuss in this committee. Next slide, please. And so here we have a calendar view of the year from the perspective of several important work streams related to budget and business services: the Local Control and Accountability Plan, or LCAP, budget development, and then select board meetings where the board adopts or moves forward action items related to the budget. So I think the most important or the most present item here is really that we are in the transition stage between the zero-based budgeting, budget balancing plan development process, and moving into the phase where we prepare for budget development to officially begin in February. So you can see here that includes preparing materials, updating allocations, and essentially preparing for all of the communication and tools and resources that go out so that the budgeting process can take place in February and March. We are also beginning to, the LCAP process is also picking up as we want to prepare a draft so that we have more time to engage, to review, to really look at the components of the LCAP, the content of the LCAP, to ensure that we have the kind of engagement and changes made that we want that reflect our values and priorities. And the next slide, the final slide, is a little bit of a double click into the next couple of months. specifically recognizing that the board adopted the budget balancing plan in December, recognizing that there is more information coming our way over the next several weeks that will inform what the final plan looks like that we implement through budget development and our second interim report. So we are eagerly awaiting an official update on the state budget from the governor. From there, we'll have most of the month of January to understand, to really interpret that, to update our revenue projections and forecasts so that by early February, we can provide a preview of budget development before allocations are officially released and the process begins in the middle of February. We've also noted here on February 8th, the plan to share a report on a central staffing functions analysis that is being planned and mapped out to begin very soon. And then we have our second interim report in March that will include an update on the budget balancing plan before it is submitted to the state in the middle of March. So I think that covers our main talking points. We can go ahead and conclude the presentation, and Commissioner Lamb, back to you.
Thank you. Before I open up for questions from commissioners, I do have a question. I'll open it up to see if there's any public comment, please.
If you would like to speak to this item, can you please raise your hand? Seeing none, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask Anne Marie and to Megan, since we last met, with the budget balancing plan, our CDE partners, fiscal experts, Elliot and Pam have also been engaged. So I just wanted to ask, where are we in the process with their role in the coming months as well, and what part will they continue advising?
So they are still engaged. CDE has authorized to have them stay on board working with the district. Having the balancing plan adopted was the first step headed towards, the balancing plan approved, but we still have to get towards adoption of that balanced budget by the end of June. So they'll be continuing to support staff in reviewing our organizational structures and looking for opportunities for realignment. While we're looking at good news on the governor's budget side, it is important for us to continue to examine how we structure the services that we provide so that we can try to gain just improvements addressing the structural imbalance in our budget. So yes, Elliot and Pam are still very much engaged with district staff and will be helping take part in updates that come forward to the Budget and Business Services Committee, as well as the full board, particularly between now and the time of approval of the second interim report in March.
And with ThickMatt has also been brought in to help us with some analysis. Will those reports be guiding our budgeting process this spring as well?
Yes, definitely. So ThickMatt's charge is to look closely at our policies and procedures as a district and looking for risk areas. The fiscal risk analysis will likely result in identifying areas where we may need to, I would just warn areas where we may need to invest more as a district if we're not investing in particular areas that make sure that we're meeting our obligations I guess I would identify just as an example, looking at our structures in accounting, if there are areas that we actually need to spend more time and making sure that we have tighter policies and procedures in place. That would be an example of something where we might need to look for areas of improvement and might require additional investments. That's purely an anecdotal example that no report has been brought forward, but that's the type of information that they would be sharing later this month. We do hope to wrap up their work in January, and they would be presenting to the board. And any recommendations that they would make, we would want to look for opportunities to respond to them in the budget that we move forward for fiscal year 2022-23.
Thank you. And colleagues, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hands raised. I went ahead and took initiative to ask the first question. So I'll have Commissioner Alexander.
Thanks, Chair Lamb, and Happy New Year to everybody. I just wanted to mention and thank the budget staff and Deputy Superintendent Lee and the Superintendent. We've had, I think, the budget staff maybe not, but the Superintendent and Deputy Superintendent Lee and I have met multiple times over the break, and just wanted to sort of express my gratitude to them for the planning we've done around the central staffing functions analysis that was mentioned in Director Gordon's report, which will be coming to the board at the February 8th meeting. And so the idea behind that also is to, between the state, we'll have the news from the state, which hopefully will be good. I saw a School Services of California email report today that said it was titled State Revenues at Stratospheric Levels. So that was a good, at least a promising headline. We'll see the actual details next week, right? So, but between that and the central staffing functions analysis, which in line with the alternative core values balancing plan, would look for other ways to streamline central functions in order that we might be able to make revisions to the balancing plan in early February or in February in advance of the March 15th second interim deadline. So I'm just excited about that and grateful for the collaboration and work on it.
Thanks so much, Commissioner Alexander, for your work and for the update and working with the superintendent and Deputy Superintendent Lee. Appreciate it. Commissioner Bogas?
Thank you. My question is in regards to community engagement, family engagement, recommendations from advisory councils, parent engagement committees within the district. And at this point, would whatever we're able to kind of do in regard to making those things happen be present in the first document we see, or is there still opportunity for the things that community have to kind of still be worked and integrated into the budget process, or is it actually kind of a little bit too late to kind of add central things, if that makes sense? It's a question.
Are you referring to kind of the, I guess, budget development or to the LCAP?
I guess I'm kind of bringing them together a little bit, since I guess in my mind, from the community side, they're really about kind of budgetary asks to support school sites and programs and things like that. And I know we always get our advisory committees kind of bringing up to us that we're not listening to their recommendations and implementing them. And so I just wanted to know if kind of this process so far had integrated the things that had kind of come through the previous year and years budget process and LCAP processes, and are we at a place where all of that is fully kind of integrated as much as it could be, or is it like a place where we're actually still trying to get guidance from community members about directions and things that we need to do as a district?
I think I would say that it's actually a little bit of both. That I think that, you know, the recommendations that we receive each year and the engagement, like we're in all the various ways that we're able to receive feedback and input, both through the LCAP stakeholder engagement process, through the engagement, you know, of the public in board meetings around our budget balancing plan. Like I would say that all of those things really do inform how, how we've moved through the budget balancing process, how we're thinking about how that, will change, or how it might change with updates from the state budget. So I think in that way, like, those recommendations really do remain present in informing how decisions are made about the budget, about changes in programs, things like that. We have a planning meeting next week to start talking about LCAP task force, and I think really trying to mobilize stakeholder engagement specific to the LCAP. So I think that's, as we come back from winter break, that's really coming, that's really rising to the surface for me. But I think that, so there will be both of those pieces. Yeah, I think that's my best take on.
No, I appreciate that.
On continuing engagement. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing with the LCAP task force. And I guess just to really center on the advisory councils and some of the other committees that we have, and just making sure that they feel heard and they really understand why either we're doing the things that they've kind of been recommending and pushing for, or why we're not, and why we're not able to, and just really making sure that people feel that that we've heard them and understand kind of what they're requesting, and have a good understanding and real transparency around our decision making about why not to fund things or do certain things that have been requested from our advisory councils. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a +1 to that. I mean, certainly, the many discussions we've had over the last half a year, but particularly the final sprint, it feels like, to December 14th, was how important it is to, center LCFF and LCAP process with our broader budgeting cycle. And so however we can continue through the infrastructures or capacity within the LCAP, but really then how do we have that more robust outreach either to our CACs or even the broader parent community that is probably much more engaged now, given where we've been and where we are. So I would all certainly work closely with the budget team, and colleagues, please also share those ideas and ask to the staff. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
If I might just add one other point, and that's we are working with the Parent Advisory Council and Parents for Public Schools, as well as the district's own communications team, to try to maintain a robust community and family engagement process ahead. That does include the LCAP, so just want to remind folks of that, because we realize that the fiscal side of the house, we're heads down trying to create a balanced budget, but really are leaning on these other partners to help us make sure we've got our heads up and are engaging with our broader community. So I think they give us some extra muscle in that area to make sure that we are trying to maintain that engagement.
Thanks.
Go ahead. Just real quick, if I could.
Yes.
Say on that, I would love to. I think that's great, and I think those organizations do. I mean, well, PAC is more of internal, and Parents for Public Schools externally, I think both do fantastic outreach work. I also think there could be opportunities. I think, as Commissioner Bogas maybe was referring to, around site councils or other ways of. And I know site councils have to deal with their own, budgets in terms of how to allocate school-based resources, but that's something I would love to think about with the team, if that's helpful, is using site councils to really have a feedback loop around some of these larger policy questions as well. Because I think they're already they're legally codified as a decision-making body, and I think could be really valuable in some ways. So just not immediate, but when we have some time and space, I think I would love to engage in that conversation a little more.
And yeah, that's something that the LCAP task force has definitely worked on, engaged in, like thought about a lot, recognizing that is, when it comes to community members informing budget decisions, that the school site council is really a powerful place for that influence, that advocacy to happen. And I also wanted to say that Michelle Jackman is here. She's in the audience. And so if it would be helpful for her to share a little bit of the PAC perspective and the LCAP task force perspective, she let me know she's here and would be happy to say more as well.
Yes, Michelle, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Michelle Jackman with the Parent Advisory Council to the Board of Ed. So yeah, I just want to really appreciate Anne-Marie and Megan and the things they've already shared in response ring true. And I want to also stress that it's not just the PAC that's involved, but because I work closely with all the other district advisory groups through the advisory alignment, which actually grew out of the work of the LCAP task force. So we're making sure that we are involving everyone in that way. And we also work with other parent organizations that are not officially affiliated with the district, like the Chinese Parent Advisory Council. We're in communication with them. And yes, we've been having this conversation, Commissioner Alexander, about the importance of site councils and really wanting to, I guess, take advantage of this moment with the budget situation to really kind of spark more interest and engagement among families with getting involved in that decision-making process at the site level and making sure that we're supporting families to be engaged and also site leaders to engage families. And I just wanted to provide a point of clarification based on my understanding, at least, which is in response to Commissioner Bogus's comment. My experience in the role I've been in the past couple of years is that among the advisory groups, there was some, I guess, a little disgruntlement previously around lack of response to recommendations, but it was not the staff or the LCAP task force that wasn't responding, it was the board at the time. So we have been very involved with the budgeting team, with the working, like they said, with communications, with LCAP task force, really trying to make sure that we are continually learning how to do it better, but also continuing to just make sure that we're all in communication about how to do this. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Bogus?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Michelle. I also just want to add, I think too, for me, from my time on the community side, as participating in the LCAP task force, one thing I just always struggled with was the lack of transparency and decision making. Even though it is a very engaging process, there is always kind of a door that the decision kind of ultimately comes out of. And I think that's what I really would love to see us kind of move away from and have a process that's really transparent and easy to understand for everyone in our school community. And so hoping we can slowly build to that and really have our advisory committees and different councils really support that work. But thank you so much for all that you do and for everyone's hard work.
And I think this would be a good recommendation for upcoming budget and business services to be able to bring that together between the work through the LCAP task force, as well as that further engagement of families and parents through this budget season. Thank you for this. This will close our first informational item. We're now going to shift to our second informational item of the evening, which is the Public Education Enrichment Fund evaluation report. And I'd like to turn it over to Edwin Diaz, our PEEF director, as well as I believe we have our PFAC co-chairs.
Thank you, Commissioner Lim. And forgive me for the coughing. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm gonna muddle through it today as best I can. As you mentioned earlier, with me today are Dr. Christopher Lee from our PEEF office and Dr. Carol Hill and Laini Matamity, our PFAC co-chairs, who are going to present today on our PEEF evaluation plan. A quick context. We shared back with the board in June 2021 that we were revamping this report And we were looking forward to sharing this information in the fall of last year. Unfortunately, we've been living through some interesting times the last couple of months. And so this item has been needed to be pushed back to make space for other important budgetary items. And so now we're here today to be able to share this information, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Christopher Lee, who's going to walk us through the first half of the presentation, and then our co-chairs will take it from there. Dr. Lee.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for providing that context. So good afternoon, everyone. As Edwin just mentioned, my name is Dr. Chris Lee, and I serve as the Manager for Strategy, Research, and Evaluation at the Public Education Enrichment Fund Office. I'm happy to have some time this afternoon to share some initial findings from our current draft of our school year 2020-21 Program Evaluation Report. Next slide, please. Actually, we can advance one more, please. All right, there we go. So as Edwin just mentioned, just some more additional context. At the time when we shared last spring, we noted that advocacy from the Board of Education and from the PFAC over the past 2 years really led or culminated with me joining the team, and then us leading a pretty substantial overhaul of how we envision evaluation activity for the funding portfolio. So since that time, all PEEF funded programs have developed continuous improvement plans. They have developed, using a results-based accountability framework, have developed implementation and impact metrics, which was a major shift. And they've also identified goals for their program. It's our hope that this report and more reports like it will hopefully definitely provide additional accountability that's needed. Will definitely provide additional transparency that's needed, and will hopefully be able to support strategic decision-making on funding priorities on behalf of the board, superintendent's leadership team, the PFAC, and San Francisco's voters. Next slide, please. We thought it'd be important to include a few caveats around this report. So again, this is for the 2020-21 school year, and this was our first time using these methodologies to report out on the portfolio of programs. And so the data that's in this report that you all have access to is baseline data. We do not have data that we're matching it with that precedes it. And as we'll recall, a lot of the programs, if not all programs that were funded, were implementing in a virtual setting. So their program outcome data is somewhat skewed or diminished or less than it would have been in an in-person setting. So we definitely want to lead with that what you're seeing are results from virtual implementation, which is certainly different than it would be if it were in person. It's also important to note that, as you'll see in the report, we were, until just literally yesterday, still waiting on a few key data sources. So National Student Clearinghouse data, I think we still had some data coming in from CDE as well. And so that's completely out of our control. We understand that there is certainly lags on those two ends, and that's particularly relevant for the AVID program and for Ali Advance, and I believe a few others that are funded through PEEF. The last caveat that we wanted to make sure we noted is that for our second highest funded program, that's Academic MTSS, which folks may recall is the package of instructional reform facilitators, academic response to instruction facilitators, assistant principals, and literacy coaches. There's no outcome data for the 2020-21 school year, as we recently, back in October, the fall, were able to meet with program staff and develop their evaluation plan. So in the report, you'll see their evaluation plan, but there is not data, as we are currently supporting staff and building those functions, those operations out to lead that work this year for the first time, to my information, to my knowledge. The next slide, please. Thanks so much. So just a kind of quick review of the framework that we're now using for program evaluation. There's three core components, and the first one is continuous improvement, which is a year-long district-wide from schools to every central office expectation to make moves on this front for continuous improvement. And that's centered on 3 core questions, which are what are we trying to improve, what changes might we make and why, and how we know if a change led to an improvement. That body of work is then supported by iterative cycles of inquiry that we call Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDSA cycles. Our goal for this year is that every funded program would get through 2 PDSA cycles in the fall and 2 in the spring in order to really advance and move and continuously improve on a few continuous improvement fronts. And we'll provide some examples of what that looks like. As I mentioned previously, programs have also developed a set of implementation and impact metrics. We'll provide some examples of what those look like as well. And they've also identified SMARTY goals. So that SMARTY is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time-bound, and equity-centered. So all programs have also developed these SMARTY goals as well. And the third component and final component is leveraging a results-based accountability framework, which really for every program helps us better understand how much was performed, how well was that service or that program performed, and then at the end of the day, how do we know the number and the percent of students or staff or families that are demonstrably and measurably better off. So we hope that this report, and we're going to go through a couple of examples in the next few slides, is able to shed some light on all 3 of these fronts. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're going to share a couple of, we'll share from 3 programs today, the AVID program, the A to G program, and ARTS. And we're just going to highlight a few items. These slides are dense. There's a lot of information in them, a lot of data in them, and it's easy to get lost. So I'm happy to circle back and answer any questions that might surface about these programs, which are selections from the report. And as you can see, the layout here is from the report, or any other programs as well. So to kind of get started, we'll start with AVID, which is our P portfolios, I believe only strictly college access and success focused program. Allocations are around $627,000. And that program primarily supports middle school and high school students with their higher education aspirations. Next slide, please. So just to kind of illustrate what we've talked about as far as the framework, you can see that, that the AVID program has identified a continuous improvement focus. The focus for this program is on increasing African-American student participation and access and enrollment in AVID. They've also identified a set of implementation metrics, which, for example, would be the number of schools that are offering AVID, number of course sections offered total at scale across the district, and student enrollment by race and by ethnicity. And they've also developed or identified some really key performance indicators related to impact, right? So for impact, they're considering college application rates, FAFSA submission rates, and college matriculation rates. And as I already mentioned again, just to kind of illustrate for the third component, or another component would be the SMART goals. So the SMART goal example here for AVID would be that they're trying to increase the percentage of students of AVID seniors that are accepted to 4-year schools from approximately 63% to 75%. That would be their SMARTY goal for AVID. Next slide, please. So again, we can see that that AVID serves, nearly 2,300 students. You can see the breakdown between middle school and high school, and students do incredibly well in the program. 86.6, so almost 90% of students earning a C or better in the course, and their average GPA is 3.44, which is, I believe, markedly higher than their non-AVID peers throughout the district. So just kind of some reinforcing information about how much was done and how well was the service or program offered. Next slide, please. And again, I'm going to kind of jump around for a few data points here. We won't kind of highlight everything, but happy to circle back. When we think about, at the end of the day, folks, students being measurably better off, we can see that a good number, over 200 AVID seniors applied to at least one 4-year college, with 175 being accepted to at least one of those schools they applied to. That totals to about 63% of AVID seniors that were accepted to at least one one four-year college. There is an asterisk there because it's important to note that, as folks may have heard or be familiar with, there's a nationwide slump in college applications and matriculation due to virtual learning. And I think some folks, from my understanding, some students being less interested in going to college right out of high school if it's going to be in a virtual setting. So I believe that that trend also held true for SFUSD, as the percentage was lower than it usually is. And the last thing, again, this kind of represents that there were some data delays. So we now will soon be able to disaggregate and report on the number and percent of AVID seniors that enrolled in college, and that data comes from the National Student Clearinghouse. Next slide, please. So we'll now focus on A to G, additional course offerings, which folks may also know as high school credit recovery. And as you can see, the funding allocation is about $3.1 million. Next slide, please. We can see that for A to G, a lot of students are served by this program. So nearly 3,800 students participate. You can see a couple of breakdowns as far as the number of students that earn credits. Program offerings are listed there. Students, again, for this program did quite well. So with 88% meeting their English benchmarks, 86% meeting their math benchmarks. And you can also see that on the bottom, under the how well did we do column, that there was a slight decline in the number of students that were off track. So that's definitely a good thing to highlight. Next slide, please. So when we think about, again, students being demonstrably and measurably better off due to the investment in implementation of this program, we can see that nearly 1,594 students earned credits through high school credit recovery, and that a good number of students, so we're up to 11,797, were on track by the end of the year. We can also see that there was a pretty substantial increase from 26% in 2020 to 37% in 21, and the percent of off-track students that earned credits through high school credit recovery. That's pretty notable, especially because it was done virtually. So having to virtually contact and work with students and staff. And then I think that's there's another part there that we can look at and see that we ended up being around 78.7% of students that were on track by the end of the year, thanks to this program. That's on track to graduate on time within the 4 years. Go to the next slide, please. And last but not least, there's many more programs. We wanted to provide a great example from our SLAM category of programs. So that would be sports, libraries, arts, and music, and focusing on the arts department, which we'll hear more about today following this presentation. And so that's about $15.3 million of funds that are allocated to the arts department across pre-K, elementary, middle, and high school. And there are multiple disciplines. So you can see that there are 6 disciplines listed here. Next slide, please. Okay, so clearly, I think as folks are pretty aware, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of students that have access to arts in SFUSD, thanks to PEEF, right? So here we can see that that's about 5,000 middle school students, 7,000 high school students, and you can also see that this is a program that's decided to really go deep on their data, and they're able to really identify and track and monitor and collect data based on student subgroup and demographic subgroups, which allows them to kind of target their approaches and their engagement and their strategies at school sites, throughout cohorts, and by student need, demographic need. Next slide, please. And then again, when we're thinking about the percentage of students that are better off, we can see that, again, it's pretty impressive, right? So over half of middle school students were able to enroll and benefit from participating in at least one visual performing arts class. You can see that data disaggregated by race and ethnicity. And you can see that it's about 44% on the high school end side. The data is also really important because it tells us where we may have areas or opportunities for growth. And so we can see that at 13.8 and 13.2%, there are some areas where we could do some engagement with students in order to increase access to students participating in arts and CTE career pathways, or enrolling in those intermediate or advanced arts classes at the high school level. Next slide, please. All right, so to kind of wind down and wrap it up here, just some next steps and vision for PEEF evaluation. Again, we're still working with program staff around academic MTSS. We know that's certainly been a big topic this year, given the budget scenario. And so we're working with staff there to determine progress to date and try to help build capacity and build systems for different goals that they're trying to meet this year. And again, a very challenging year. And then the next piece I want to speak about is capacity building with the CAC. We certainly want to make sure that we are increasing transparency, increasing data access, but also increasing CAC members' knowledge, expertise, and information on program operations, on continuous improvement work that the program managers and their staff are leading, and on, again, student, family, and staff impact. So the positive impact and the positive return on investment from these programs. We're hoping that the data that's in this report and other reports and networkings that we do with the programs will be able to inform their spring ratings recommendations. As we've also kind of heard previously in the previous presentation, we too are looking to expand and provide kind of glean additional insights from students and families. So we've conducted a round of interviews with several CAC members, including our SAC our student CAC members, or our SAC representatives on the PEEF CAC. And we've also kind of put out some initial feelers about what it might look like to partner with our instructional rounds processes when it's safe to do so that we can actually let people see what the programs look like in implementation live on the ground. We're certainly trying to think about how we might increase our research functions and partner with and deepen our partnership with the Research Planning and Assessment Office, and certainly leveraging our stellar and renowned partnership with Stanford University. So that's one of our key levers in order to build out that research function. And as I've already mentioned, we're certainly interested in increasing the level of rigor and additional models that we can use to better assess cost benefit from our investments. With, again, the goal of it being able to provide much needed information to district leaders, including the board and SLT, to make those strategic funding priority decisions. The last thing I'll note here is alignment with our zero-based budgeting process. We realize that there's a lot of similarities between both bodies of work and that there's some synergies there. So we're exploring in early conversations means to actually kind of support that evaluation component for zero-based budgeting. And again, helping provide data and evidence to inform decision-making on funding priorities. And I think with that might be the next slide, please. Yeah, I think that wraps it up. So looking forward to discussions, questions, and yeah, I'm happy to clarify or to repeat anything.
Actually, before we transition, we have a couple more slides for our PFAC co-chairs. If we can go to our next slide. And I'll turn it over to our co-chairs, Dr. Carol Hill and Laini Matamity.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Happy holidays. I'm Dr. Carol Hill, and I am the Executive Director for the San Francisco Beacon Initiative. First, I want to say, we want to give Dr. Chris all the love because of all the work he does for the CAC. Really appreciate all the effort that he's put in. So I just wanted to put that out there right away. Today, we are here speaking as individual co-chairs at your request, but I'm sorry, to present at this meeting. And the reason we're here as individuals is because this came after our last PFAC meeting. But the request came after our last PFAC meeting that we attend. But that said, all PFAC members have been invited to join, and we welcome them to add their comments. Today, we are offering our general observations regarding the Public Education Enrichment Fund. As the commissioners are aware, voters funded PEEF with the requirement that funds be used to supplement, not supplant, existing funding sources. These funds are offered by the City of San Francisco to provide students across the district with access to enrichment opportunities that they would otherwise not have. We continue to seek greater transparency as to how the PEEF is used, especially when modified from the year's approved expenditure plan, and how these funds supplement other and larger funding sources, such as the local control funding formula allocations. This was highlighted front and center in our most recent recommendations made to the board and the superintendent in May 2021. Quote, especially considering the current fiscal situation, the PFAC continues to seek greater transparency, coordination, and alignment with the general fund and PEEF allocation processes and priorities on an ongoing basis. Now I'm going to pass it to Laini.
Next slide, please. So I'm Laini Matamity. I am Dr. Carol Hill's other co-chair, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. And I want to just quickly mention that I'm coming to the end of my 4-year term, so I'm particularly reflective at this moment. I joined the PFAC in order to better understand the district as a whole, its priorities, decision-making, and the general ecosystem of programs and staff and our school sites. And I did get that, and I got a lot more. So thank you. I want to appreciate my PFAC colleagues, PEEF staff, and the commissioners for the support of the CAC's work. So today we're offering our thoughts regarding the current process and suggestions for improvement. And Commissioner Bogus and Alexander actually teed up one of our thoughts, and that's one district, one budget. So when we look at PEEF, it's currently pretty challenging to see how different funding sources interact to meet district goals, budget requirements, and how PEEF is used to supplement and not supplant in an effort to build out consistent enrichment programming for our students. So the idea of one budget centers on student impacts, measurable goals, with funding sources to follow that would enable the PFAC and the general public to better understand how the district is leading with students and utilizing funds to support student goals. I've heard this concept raised by our ThickMatt colleagues, and it makes a lot of sense. And Dr. Chris's presentation just before us gives great examples of how programs can be reviewed and assessed, and that information can help lead student-centered decision-making and budget to support those goals. So right now it's very difficult to connect funding decisions to student priorities. And as the voters did approve PEEF as a student-centered funding source, integration of a one district, one budget through the local control accountability plan or some other centering document or process could be a first start to improve transparency around student priorities and the funding sources that support them. And a couple examples that come to mind are, it's problematic when structural budget problems that have been in place for years, when there's modifications to the PEEF expenditure plan that are not necessarily noticed or identified. And we believe the significant variances or budget modifications should be noticed to the board and to the CAC, especially in this year as we're recovering from distance learning and are continuing to address learning recovery. We appreciate staff's continuing work to provide greater transparency. We currently now receive quarterly expenditure reports and are continuing to get the kind of information that you saw today in Dr. Chris's presentation. Secondly, and I see that Sam Bass is here from as our arts director, PEEF has been in place since 2007 and is the largest funder of sports, libraries, arts, and music, our SLAM programs, yet families and students don't have readily available information about what programs are being offered at which sites, which students are being served, or the pathways that are in place. And so it's difficult as a PFAC to affirm consistency in programming and access and where or if pathways exist. And we're really grateful to the work that Sam has undertaken as the arts department director, and he's come and he's presented to us as a CAC. And we know that he has similar concerns and is working very hard to address them and to look at how programs are scoped, delivered, and are designed to serve our broad student population, regardless of which school they're at or the educational supports that they need to participate. The second point is expenditure plans should reflect the reality of the work. And I already just touched upon this about needing to see when modifications to scope or funding use happen, they should be noticed. And we agree with the audit findings that were communicated last October or November around greater transparency needed in that particular area. And then lastly, just as a CAC, I really recommend that, I recommend that Brown Act training is given to across the advisories. Currently, the lack of guidance stymies the ability of the PFAC and other advisories to conduct needed work. And it's just difficult to figure out how to structure ourselves as an advisory without having support on how to do so in order to develop greater understanding among CAC members and to develop the ability to more purposely prepare between meetings. And now with that chunk of information, I pass the presentation back to Carol.
Great. Next slide, please. All right, so the following comments regarding the current budget cycle were developed by a group of PFAC members representing 6 commissioner offices and the Student Advisory Council in response to the budget recommendations that were adopted in December. They are based upon what we've heard from program staff, students, and the general public, and our observations as CAC members. However, given the Brown Act public noticing requirements, we were unable to share them as a CAC prior to the budget being adopted. We reiterate that even in this most recent budget cycle, the PFAC was not given advance notice of the district's recommended elimination of PF-funded programs. These decisions appear to take place without transparency regarding student impacts and the process used to determine district recommended cuts. We applaud Dr. Chris and PF staff's work that was just shared with you. This work has been a substantial undertaking and is the type of visibility and transparency that the PFAC has been advocating for PF and frankly for all programs. 2 of the programs highlighted today, however, were recommended for elimination, AVID and A through G recovery. Other defunded programs are career technical pathways and multilingual pathways. After learning of these cuts, PFAC members came together to communicate their deep concern about the proposed cuts that would have disproportionate effects on vulnerable and priority students identified by the state and the district. Next slide. Constraining aggressive timelines limit our ability to fully vet our recommendations, especially in this heightened budget year, and the need to consider our students and school staff's recovery from more than a year of distance learning. Our recommendations continue to be limited by a process that has the CAC serve mostly as a pass-through formality, often appearing to repurpose use of PEF to fill general fund gaps. Rather than fulfilling the intent of the voters to create a supplemental revenue source to directly benefit students, we continue to seek greater transparency regarding district decision-making as it relates to our students and PEF funding purposes. Laini.
All right, I think we can advance a couple, so Carol covered that one already, so you can advance once more. So just in conclusion, we are continuing to establish priorities and review the use of funds to ensure students benefit. And we appreciate PEF staff's ongoing efforts to support the work of the PFAC and to increase transparency. We wish for these efforts to be replicated beyond just PEF programs and budget. We would all benefit from one district, one plan, one budget, expenditure plans that reflect reality and are updated accordingly, and consistent Brown Act training for the advisories to support their work so we can support your work. And then the next slide. So these are some of the documents that we referred to in this presentation, if folks would like to dig a little deeper. And our next CAC meeting is next Wednesday, a week from today, from 6 to 8 p.m. And as always, all are welcome. And with that, we conclude our presentation. Thanks, Dr. Chris and Dr. Carroll, for sharing the time.
Thank you so much to the PEEF team, to Dr. Chris, Lee, and to our co-chairs. I really have appreciated the thoughtfulness, the intentionality, and the realness of lifting and shining more light to the budgeting process, particularly in the lens of PEEF. And I just want to extend my deep appreciation to the PEEF CAC and particularly to the co-chairs. And you've been steady, steadfast in your leadership. So thank you for your service. And so with that, let's open up to public comment, and then we'll go to commissioners for discussion.
If you'd like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. Seeing one, Commissioner.
Well, do 90 seconds, please.
Okay, Michelle.
Yes, hi, thank you. Michelle here again with the Parent Advisory Council. I just again wanted to appreciate Dr. Lee and the PEEF CAC co-chairs for presenting this information tonight and for the detailed work they've done. I want to I would love to see this kind of data dive, especially that was done on programs like AVID and credit recovery, used as a best practice or a model that we could do for programs district-wide. I think that was really, really helpful, especially as we look at what programs we, are considering cutting. It pairs nicely with the firsthand testimonials we've heard from so many students about the profound impact these programs have had on their lives and their futures. And I would also like to echo Laini Matamity's recommendation that appropriate Brown Act training be provided to all the district advisories, both liaisons and parent leaders. And I just want to emphasize that it's going to be a little bit different than the training that was provided to the Board of Ed, just some of the terminology and things like that. So thank you very much.
I do see another one. Julia.
Hi, my name is Julia Jackson, and I'm a current member of PEEF CAC. Similar to what the last commenter said, I wanted to really credit Dr. Lee and Laini and Dr. Hill and all of my co-members for all the just hard work that they do. And I agree with all the suggestions that are put forward, particularly regarding transparency. And Laini was talking about, joining to learn more about the whole district. And to be honest, as a parent, it's really been a labyrinth. And we need more of the transparency. I've been on 2 years, and I feel like it's literally taking me this long just to get my arms around the district and what the PEEF CAC does. And I know everyone's been working really hard to improve the accountability and transparency, but I just want to make sure that keeps going. Thank you.
That's it, Commissioner.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for the public comment. And again, once again, to our PEEF CAC members and co-chairs. Commissioner Sanchez?
Thank you, Chair Lam. I too want to appreciate the PEEF CAC and staff, Dr. Lee and the co-chairs for your presentation. I was just wondering if staff has a response to the concluding slide, the one district, one plan and budget, the expenditure plans that reflect reality and are updated accordingly, and then Brown Act training. Do we have some response?
I can start. I'll go for it. Better that you go for it first.
Thank you, Edwin. I just want to start with thinking about the one district, one budget. I would say that I definitely share that thinking. And that's in part why PEEF is being included in the overall evaluation of funding sources that are contributing to the core work of our district. Just recognizing that these funds, while they have their restrictions, also have some additional flexibility where we as a district can decide what programs we are going to prioritize for using this critical local funding source for. So when it comes to the zero-based budgeting effort and looking at our different programs and having to make really difficult decisions about what we're going to keep as core or highest priority versus what we're going to have to defund, it was essential that staff look at PEEF as part of that mix of programs that we are currently investing in. That being said, if there are opportunities to identify new funding sources, such as looking at the state budget that we'll soon get more detail on with the governor's January budget, if there are new funding sources coming our way, we would want to look at all of the items that have been proposed for cuts and evaluate what should be put back on the table and where funding should be restored. And so I guess in summary, one district, one budget, that PEEF is part of that mix. I think we're having consistent thinking in that light. I also just want to highlight that whatever moves forward for PEEF funding will have to go through the PEEF CAC. The balancing process that we just completed of developing our balancing plan hasn't gone through the PEEF CAC yet. It's identified things that would be proposed for reductions, but for those things that are going to be proposed to continue funding, the PEEF CAC will need to review and evaluate and make sure that they are meeting the criteria and standards of that body, and that they can stand by the recommendation to move them forward for funding. Those are just some initial thoughts. Edwin, do you have anything to add?
Yes, hopefully I can get it out. In terms of the Brown Act, very quickly, I was just going to say that the PEEF CAC did receive a Brown Act training by a legal department 2 years ago, prior to us going into COVID. And but since that time, many of our members have changed. And so there would be some sort of value to having a refresher. And I know that some of the other CACs would also have expressed some desire for wanting to also get some training on the Brown Act. That said, it is a complicated piece of legislation to understand, and it's not very, not one training won't, take hold. And so I think it's one thing that we'll probably need, more than one training. And I think Deputy Lee also wanted to share some thoughts on the Brown Act.
Yes, if I may, thank you, Edwin, and good evening, commissioners and everyone. I just wanted to build off of what Mr. Diaz just said and just share that we are aware that many of our advisory committees are encountering the need and the value for more Brown Act training, and so that is in the works. I'm not sure exactly what the form is. I've just texted our General Counsel Danielle Houck as we're having this conversation, and Mr. Quinn, if you know more, please chime in. But this has come up in a few different meetings that I've been in, and details will be forthcoming. But I believe that there is a plan to provide information or resources or training about the Brown Act to our advisory committees as a whole. And I definitely, for my part, understand and appreciate the comments that our co-chairs, our PFAC co-chairs, Ms. Matamity and Dr. Hill made about the ambiguities, I'll say, that took place in December around the series of meetings related to the balancing plan, and I could see how that was confounding for members of the PFAC, and we'll definitely try to work on that going forward.
Okay, just one last thing. I wanted to commend the PFAC and Dr. Lee as well for moving forward with the evaluation process, the program evaluation process. I'm really interested to see how that rolls out. So thank you again.
Thank you. Commissioner Bogus?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to thank the CAG for their comments and the concerns around transparency, and just really want to be in dialogue over the next part of this year to really figure out how we can strengthen these systems as we examine like our spending habits, the kind of way we do our budget, and the way we kind of structure our central office, and really hopefully find better ways to kind of do everything and make things more transparent and open. So I think just a lot of support and solidarity around that. I would just say, I think I do support the idea around the Brown Act trainings and kind of making them more available for everyone. But also I feel like it might even be helpful for us to have someone who is an expert who can actually be in the meetings to kind of advise and give people tips, because just being trained doesn't actually, I think, necessarily do enough to ensure you're ready to handle any situation that might come up versus someone with more expertise. So I think trying to figure out how we balance all these things and how we kind of structure all the advisory committees that support the work we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Alexander?
Thank you. I want to add my gratitude to Laini and Carol in particular for their portion, as well as Dr. Lee for the very detailed and excellent kind of framework for analysis there. And I guess I wanted to follow up on the one district, one budget idea. I think it's really smart, and I know you, Chief Wallace, have shared before that you agree with that and said it again just now. And I guess I just wonder if if we have ideas collectively around how to begin to sort of move toward that. I mean, I think it would, just even one example of how that's not happening is the fact that we just got a report on how great AVID is, and now this data in Dr. Lee's presentation when that program just got recommended for elimination, right? So it's kind of like, does the left hand know what the right hand is doing? Or are we saying, we looked at that data and we still think AVID should be eliminated, and here's why, right? And I guess because the PFAC is operating just with the PEEF funding, and because things are moving in and off on PEEF and off PEEF budget, it becomes really, really confusing. And so my understanding of what Laini and Carol were proposing is that we begin to have a more unified way of looking at the budget, so that programs get the same level of scrutiny and evaluation, that kind of along the lines of what you were doing, Dr. Lee, but regardless of whether they're part of PEEF or not. And that then we sort of have a way of also assuring that then the PEEF funding is used to supplement as it's supposed to be, but we still look at the things that the general fund is funding in a similar lens and say, are we getting our money's worth, right? Which I think we should always be asking. So, and I don't think the budget staff disagrees with any of this, but I'm curious if we have thoughts on how to kind of take that work to the next level, so that we have more. I think when people talk about the transparency, it's kind of along those lines. If that makes sense. So I don't know if folks have any thoughts on that. I'd love to hear them if you do.
I know my immediate reaction is that my first year in on the job and talking with Edwin and learning about Dr. Lee's work was, how do we scale this? This is really great stuff. And also our budget is very large, and also we hit a pandemic. So here we are, all recognizing the value of this work, and wanting to use data and to help inform our budgetary decisions, most definitely. And so I guess I want to address your point, Commissioner Alexander, of was the left hand talking to the right? I would say that the answer is yes, and it was the latter of those two scenarios where we had a lot of bad choices in front of us, and unfortunately we had to choose the proposal to put AVID forward. But I think looking at the data, then it would require us to consider, if we do have new funds coming in, would we consider restoring AVID because we're seeing that it's effective? So those are the kinds of questions that we'll be wanting to ask ourselves as we go forward with development of the PFAC expenditure plan and ultimately budget adoption. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, totally. That totally makes sense. And that's what I assumed. So I didn't mean to suggest that there was no consideration for it. I was kind of saying, but I think maybe what I was trying to say was more along the lines of the transparency of that process, because somebody from the outside might say, does the left hand know what the right hand is doing? I guess is what I was sort of trying to say. Not that I was assuming that that was the analysis that had happened internally. And so then how do we, PFAC is a model also for doing this in a way that's transparent. So I think that would be my question, is sort of moving forward, how do we have that conversation more in public so that people can say, hey, we actually looked at the data, we know AVID's really good as a program, but we did decide to cut it because we actually had to prioritize these other things, and that conversation happens in a way that folks can sort of see unfolding, which I know is really complex, and we're in a pandemic. So I'm not expecting any of that to happen overnight, but I would love to continue to think with you all about how to do that, because I think that's what I'm hearing from community members when folks ask about transparency. It's not that folks are saying we can't make hard decisions, but it's like, how do we do it in a way that really is fully transparent, and folks then have a chance to weigh in on them too, right? And so that people know what is it that we preserved to give up AVID if that was our decision, and then where was the opportunity to say, hey, actually AVID's more important than that, or vice versa. So I think those are the kinds of questions I was thinking about.
Thank you. Deputy Superintendent Lee?
Thanks. If I could just add 2 points of information. One is on the issue of, as Chief Wallace said, trying to scale our capacity to more systematically review evidence, as Dr. Lee shared examples of approaches that are taking place within P-funded programs. This is a little bit on the midterm, perhaps mid to long-term horizon, but we have had some encouraging conversations with our RPA, our research planning and assessment colleagues, as well as external researchers who we've all had some discussions about this need and really this interest, and it's, as many of you know, it's a long-standing interest. But the good news is there's a glimmer of some progress that we've engaged in these conversations with 2 researchers. One is from Teachers College and one is from American University, who are actually focused in aspects of their research on this question at scale within school districts, and have received some funding support, and I'm forgetting the funder, to work with SFUSD to try to demonstrate how a district can improve its capabilities to do exactly this, to systematically use evidence to inform resource allocation decisions, evidence of outcomes included. So that's one thing that we'll look forward to sharing more information in various settings about as that effort progresses. And then just on a separate note related to AVID, I just wanted to share that, and this was probably a little bit hard to discern in December in the meetings in which this was discussed, but in the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant plan, which was, I think it was discussed in December and approved in December, there was a portion of that plan that is intended, and this was sort of, at the late stages of the budget balancing plan meetings, or the meetings related to the budget balancing plan. There was, I believe, $500,000 that was identified in that, using that resource, the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant, that I know Dr. Priestley has intended to to utilize to offset, maybe not completely offset, but largely offset these reductions that were put forward from PEEF to basically recoup most of the funds. Most of the program investments using that other alternative funding source. So just for what it's worth, I wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment as well, and Laini, I see your hand up. I just want to comment really quickly, absolutely +1 times 100 for Dr. Lee, your work. When I sat on the PFAC and co-chaired it for 2 years, us at that time were also grappling, like how do we demonstrate, impact through our investments, our PEEF dollars, and what does that mean that's reaching the students as we talk, every time I feel like our board comes together around that student-centered investments and outcomes. And I would love to see that deeper investment and growth. So I'm excited to hear about the potential partnership with researchers, alignment between the PEEF office with RPA, because this is the moment, right, when a district is facing fiscal crisis and really, how do we get back to our core of knowing, how those dollars are really having the greatest impact for our students. And frankly, as we steer through the pandemic, I certainly feel strongly that, not only is it about the opportunity and academic developments of our students that need to be in the forefront of education recovery, but also that social, emotional, and supports for our students as whole children of themselves. So I welcome really strategic focus from the board, how we can support the staff as you move forward in with this, because that to me is top of mind, is that, how are we really demonstrating with the funds we do have and will have that is making the greatest change in our students and in their lives. So thank you again for that, I want to use the word innovative, but for really the intentionality around the strategy looking ahead. So thank you. And Laini, I see your hand up, so please go ahead and comment.
You said a lot of what I wanted to say. I wanted to underscore that this is, what you saw today is the result of dogged and tenacious and sustained effort. And I think there's many folks in this room, Edwin, obviously Dr. Chris Lee, Sam Bass, as a former PFAC member, Commissioner Sanchez, what a long time coming this is. And I think because we have, I want to thank the city voters, because we have this in the city charter, we have a way as a CAC that's unique to this specific CAC to ask for data and increased transparency and accountability that presents itself in a unique way to become an incubator for things that can be done in other parts of the district. And, after 4 years of being on the CAC, my hope is that I've left it better than I found it, but also my hope is that this work can continue and that we can learn from this and the things that have been developed. And like, for instance, Director Bass, his arts, the Mr. Opitz Foundation deep dive was phenomenal. I mean, so that kind of work to center on our students, that is the purpose, frankly, of the LCAP. Not PEEF. I mean, that's great that PEEF is doing that, but I would love to see the LCAP undergo that kind of effort. And even if we just chip away, it's not going to happen tomorrow. But, I remember being at the board meeting, as a attendee, and hearing Michael Fine talk about how the LCAP is supposed to be the centering document for our students, for our staff, for our teachers, our school sites, and then the budget follows that. And so this is the kind of work that we really need to continue to drum on and continue to elevate and to continue to support, because it's hard work. It requires that we look at ourselves, and we applaud the things that we do well, but it requires that we take a harder look at the things that are not functioning as well as they ought to be, especially, as I said, with our SLAM programs funded through 2007. We should have a lot more continuity and transparency about what is being offered, where and why, and for all of our students. So that's what I'm hoping in this LCAP process, and I'm very thankful for having Michelle Jackman with us and moving through that process and engaged with the PAC as well as the LCAP task force and other advisories, that we can make progress in the LCAP. And I was pleased to see the Anne Marie's representation of how the LCAP is going to be rolled out this year, and I think we can make progress. But when I say like one budget, one plan, one district, right? Like as a family, as a parent, I would love to be able to have a document where I can look at an executive report and say like, oh, this is what the district is working on, and this is what they're valuing in our students, and this is how they're measuring it, and these are our goals, and all these decisions are falling out of that. So that's what I say. And oh, by the way, Dr. Carol Hill has, she had to take care of her kids. So she apologizes for not being able to stay for the whole meeting.
Thank you again so much. So colleagues, again, thank you to the staff and the PFAC members. And thank you, Laini, for your service. I know when service concludes, it's also, a lot of time for reflection, but just want to express our gratitude. So thank you. At this time, I'll conclude our second information item. Colleagues, I do want to recognize, I know it's 5:30, but these were two very hefty and important agenda items. So please bear with us. I know we've been, our budget and business services committees have been over 2 hours every time we meet, but please, hang in that what critical information this is going to be presented both by staff and engagement with our broader SFUSD community. So with that, I will go into our third and final informational item, which is our Arts and Creativity 2025 SFUSD's Arts Equity Plan and Updated Fiscal Impact Analysis of the resolution number 195-28A1. And I believe for the presentation, it will be Sam Bass, the Director of the Arts in the Arts Equity Plan.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Lamb, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I will try to make this as efficient as possible. My name is Sam Bass, and I serve as the Director of the Arts Department. I'm excited to be here today to continue moving forward with recommending board adoption of Arts and Creativity 2025 SFUSD's Arts Equity Plan, formerly known as the Arts Education Master Plan Refresh. This was brought to first reading and to Curriculum Committee and now to you. You'll see in our presentation that there are parts of the Arts Equity Resolution that require funding. Edwin Diaz is here as Director of PEEF to present the fiscal impact analysis that was created for the resolution. And at the end, we will make recommendations on how to move forward. As you may recall, the Arts Equity Plan was paused by the Curriculum Committee in June of 2019 for our department to go back and incorporate the Arts Equity Resolution, as well as solicit more feedback from a more diverse group of stakeholders. Hopefully, you've all had a chance to review the plan. For the public, it is posted on board docs in 7 different languages. Before we dive into the plan, I'd like to take a couple of slides just to remind everyone in the public of who we are and our goals for the year and beyond. As you know, we are an educational program within the Division of Curriculum and Instruction, also known as CNI, supporting the 5 arts disciplines of dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual art. And I could add a whole slew of singleton courses for secondary that we also support. We continue this year to focus on increasing the potential for arts and creativity for our most marginalized students, and our focus on anti-racist arts instruction in all of our classrooms pre-K-12. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of our current staffing structure for 21-22. As you know, through the Public Education Enrichment Fund, we are able to fund arts teachers at all grade levels for every site. Over the past 2 years, we have reduced the number of central office admin in our department by 2 positions, and we have reduced our clerical and project management staff by 2 positions. We are excited about the addition of a dance teacher on special assignment to our team this year. And for transparency, these positions listed on the slide are only positions that we fund as a department through PEEF, and this slide does not include site-funded positions. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the newly updated plan, Arts and Creativity 2025. I'm going to highlight the 3 major components of the plan and some key points from each of those components. Next slide, please. As you see, the first component of the Arts Equity Plan is Equity and Excellence. SFUSD will ensure equity in arts and creativity programming and student outcomes. The district views equity and excellence as inherently interdependent and mutually reinforcing, and therefore will focus especially on students who typically are deprived of arts and creativity education, including students of historically disadvantaged racial groups, English learners, and students in special education. Our equity focus will be on the type and number of arts offerings at school sites, the quality of arts curriculum and instruction, targeted systems, solutions for students who have been historically excluded, and better leveraging San Francisco's myriad of resources. Next slide, please. The next component is clarity and coherence. A big part of this work is creating the space and structures to connecting teachers with one another and then connect teachers and arts coordinators with arts organizations. We meet twice a month as an elementary department, and we now have secondary meeting rotations as well for professional development. This is our 2nd year of supporting secondary arts on a much deeper level. For example, we sent out emails to all secondary job alikes and started a conversation saying, hey, everybody, here are all the people who teach animation in the district. Let's get a learning community going. That had not happened before, and it's been highly successful. These groups then use the tools to share curriculum, how they're utilizing technology and software, and other things like that. Last year, we began to meet monthly with the SFUSD Arts Community Collaborative to galvanize the arts community of San Francisco and the Bay Area. And we collaborated with in a number of different ways. Resource assessments are an ongoing iterative process for us. For example, last year we had to mobilize about 20,000 art kits to be distributed. We pumped out technology across middle and high schools, and we reflected on our FTE and staffing to make some changes, which we will continue to do each moving forward through an equity lens. Next slide, please. As we move forward, we need to make sure that we are collecting the appropriate data, reviewing it with all of our stakeholders to gain insight and input, reporting the findings in a transparent way, and working to continuously improve our programs and practices with our students at the forefront. And an example of one way we were able to use the data from the Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation audit in regards to the underrepresentation of students of color in the arts programs, we were able to identify that the fact that the diversity of our staff does not proportionally match the diversity of our SFUSD students. Thus, through these past few months, we have been intentionally seeking a more diverse pool of candidates for hiring. And of the 6 open positions we had, we were able to recruit 5 teachers of color, and we intend to keep moving in this direction with staff. It is stated in our Arts Equity Plan that every student in San Francisco Unified has the right to participate and succeed in high quality courses and a variety of culturally relevant arts disciplines as part of their basic core education, regardless of their background, culture, language, socioeconomic status, or place of residence. In order to do this, we need to collect and analyze our data to set goals to better realize our beliefs. Next slide, please. As another reminder, one of the recommendations from the Curriculum Committee in June 2019 was to solicit feedback from a more diverse group of stakeholders, as well as more community input. Here you can see many of the organizations that reviewed the draft plan and provided feedback to us. We were able to partner with these organizations for this feedback through our SFUSD Arts Community Collaborative. In addition to the many arts organizations that provided feedback on the plan, it's important to acknowledge and appreciate the work of the original Arts Education Master Plan Refresh Task Force, for which many of the components of the Arts Equity Plan came from. We were also able to review and gather feedback from our Arts Equity Committee, which is comprised of 15 to 20 arts teachers from across the district. Several school site arts coordinators gave feedback, our high school student interns, which were new last year, and multiple members of the PFAC. We will still continue to collect feedback on the plan by connecting with the Parent Advisory Council, which I believe is happening next month, I think is calendared for then, when we're able to fit this into the agenda, as well as our Community Advisory Council for Special Education, which has already provided some helpful feedback. Next slide, please. As was presented to the Curriculum Committee in August, in June 2019, Commissioner Collins and Commissioner Lopez drafted the Arts Equity Resolution. It was unanimously passed by the board that summer. The next two slides are going to show you what the resolution calls for. Bullet points in green reflect items that have either been completed or are in progress. Items in dark blue represent things that the resolution calls for that still need to be addressed, mainly through funding. As you see here, we have adopted the Declaration of Rights of all students to equity and access in arts learning. We had posters made with the declaration translated into 2 other languages for our arts teachers to post in their classrooms and around their school sites. We have the Arts Equity District badge on our website as well as social media. We have aligned our Arts Equity Plan with the Arts Equity Resolution as requested and suggested. To date, we don't have identified funding to fulfill bullet number 4 that calls for 1 full-time arts teacher at every elementary school. We have begun the process of adjusting secondary FTEs to be more equitable and based on enrollment. As you know, we have quadrupled our instrument inventory even through a global pandemic, and we are in the process of finalizing an instrument inventory system that will bring us into the 21st century. It's very exciting. Our partnerships with other departments within the division of C&I have increased, and we've shifted the culture of the arts department functioning as a siloed department to one of collaboration with other subjects and disciplines. Next slide, please. We have increased teacher allocations to ensure they are able to get the resources they need. Again, we have yet to identify funding that will increase the FTEs needed to shift our teachers from being itinerant to being site-based. Due to budget constraints, we have not yet been able to expand the role of the arts coordinators, but we are working towards that goal as funding potentially increases through PEEF or other funding sources are identified. Our teachers now have access to instruments for students that they don't have to rent and they don't have to share, and art materials as well. However, they continue to struggle with space for storage and space to teach at school sites. Many of our elementary teachers have to teach in the multipurpose room, in libraries, cafeterias, even hallways with no space to store any equipment. We did, however, I told you about the rental part, sorry. The last bullet regarding evaluating programs should actually be green also, because as you've seen this afternoon, we are already working with the PEEF office each year to evaluate our program and solicit feedback through the PFAC. Next slide, please. In order for the Arts Equity Resolution to be completely fulfilled, here's what is needed. Permanent sustainable funding for 21 additional elementary arts FTEs, which would then allow us to decentralize our teaching roster and shift them to being site-based and site-supervised. Based on the data from the Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation audit, which is available to the public and has been posted, in collaboration with our music teachers, we need to redesign the elementary music program to increase access for all elementary students, not just the ones in 4th and 5th grade who can be pulled out of class. The model we will move to will assign 2 arts teachers to 2 elementary sites. The 2 teachers will be of 2 different arts disciplines and each be at those 2 sites each week based on scheduling agreed upon by those 2 sites in collaboration with the teachers. And lastly, as a district, we need to identify and possibly even create art-specific instructional spaces at each elementary school site. In just a moment, my colleagues from the PEEF office, Edwin, will share the fiscal and impact analysis of the arts equity resolution. In anticipation of some questions that you and the public might have regarding our current budget and funding amounts, the next slide will show you the information I shared with the PFAC in October about our first quarter adjustments that were needed to our spending this year to give you context to cost. So you can see here, we had to make several adjustments over the first quarter of this school year to our elementary instrumental program due to the SFDPH guidance that constantly was changing for wind instruments through this pandemic. The guidance came out on August 11th, and Ron Machado, our supervisor of performing arts, and we hit the ground running, ordering everything we needed, and then the guidance changed again on September 10th, and so we had to quickly pivot our spending to make sure that we had all the specialized PPE we needed for all of our instruments so that our programs would not have to be paused. We also had to order many more instruments for our inventory that were not wind-based, which is for obvious reasons. So we had many, many more violins, ukuleles, and guitars purchased, which are now in the hands of students, again, that they don't have to rent and they don't have to share through a global pandemic. So that's been extremely something to be proud of. We had to reallocate funds from other line items in our budget for instrument purchases. Through the help of the budget office and Chief Wallace, we were able to identify FEMA to cover some of the specialized PPE. And we've had to pull from all of our different arts budgets to get through the first quarter this year. But all of that, we were only talking about, roughly about $500,000 worth of money moving around. So I just wanted to give some context to cost when we're talking about the resolution, which needs, $2.6 million more of sustainable funding a year. When you're exploring the options, it's just something to consider. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it to Edwin, Director of PEEF.
Thanks, Sam. So accompanying this presentation in board docs, you can read the entire fiscal analysis. A copy was updated to board docs last week. But here are some just key highlights from it. So as Sam mentioned, in order to enact the arts equity resolution, the arts department would need an additional 21 FTE. And so we used essentially the average teacher salary to kind of come up with a calculation of what that would cost. And so you see there that would be about $2.3 million. And then in consultation with Sam and his team, just came up with a couple of additional numbers about what would be needed to also implement the resolution in terms of instrument repair, storage, which he just mentioned, is important because of the way teachers are teaching and the limited space at school sites. Additional materials, and then we wouldn't have to pay for evaluation, thankfully, because Sam and his team have developed a great relationship with the Mr. Holland Opens Foundation. So that work is already taking place, so we wouldn't have to pay for that. So we're looking at an annual cost, an increased annual cost to the arts department of about $2.6 million. On top of what they already received, which is around $15 million. Next slide, please. So just to kind of share a little bit of context of how we're looking in the future in terms of PEEF dollars. These are this is what the revenue, and we anticipate the revenue to be for these SLAM programs over the next couple of years. You see, and before I say that, I should say that these numbers are based on the city's projected revenue for PEEF from their 6 months report that they released last spring. And these numbers hopefully will be updated soon, and we think these might go up. We're hearing rumors that the city is expecting a larger windfall than it previously anticipated, so hopefully these numbers will improve. But currently, excuse me, in the current fiscal year, the arts department has a budget of $16 million with a fund balance of about $1.5 million. And in 22-23, that would go up to $17 million. And then in 23-24, that would increase to $18 million. And so we are a little short. If we added another $2.6 million to their budget, we might not be able to meet that, especially if the numbers don't increase as the city is anticipating. So just wanted to share that information on how the numbers are looking in a couple of years. Next slide, please. And so given that, we have a couple of recommendations that we wanted to share. One recommendation is that the board pass the Arts Equity Plan, but temporarily postpone enacting the Arts Equity Resolution until either PFAC revenue increases or additional funding could be identified. The other recommendation is, which is not the best, but it's something that the board could look at, and that is we currently distribute the SLAM funding that we receive through pre-established, predetermined percentages. And so that those go as following: the arts department being the largest department because it contains 5 disciplines, receives 40% of the SLAM funding, and followed by athletics at 12, libraries at 30, and physical education at 18. And we could change these percentages slightly to help the arts department absorb the cost of implementing the Arts Equity Resolution. And so that could be one approach. Yeah, and so next slide. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sam for any final thoughts.
Great. And I would just say, and this is just speaking earnestly to you all as commissioners, I think I would like to reword tabling the Arts Equity Resolution to continuing to work on identifying funding to make that happen while we go ahead and move forward and get the Arts Equity Plan board approved and in place and shared with the public to show our arts priorities and our approach to arts education in general. And with that, Commissioner Lamb, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sam, to you and your team for the tremendous work since you've come into the position. You have to remind me, are you year 2 or 3?
3.
It's that COVID year. Thank you so much. Before I open up to commissioners, let's open to public comment, please, Deborah.
If anybody'd like to speak to this item, can you please raise your hand? Seeing 2, Commissioner.
Okay, let's do 90 seconds, please. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle.
Thank you, Deborah. Michelle here again, coordinator for the Parent Advisory Council. Again, I just want to thank Sam for this presentation, Sam and Edwin, and really appreciate the detail and the thought that went into it. I'm very much looking forward to sharing this information with the PAC at our February meeting, which is a reminder to everyone is a public meeting and everyone is welcome to attend. It'll be on the first Thursday of February at 6 p.m. And also just want to just elevate the very thoughtful asks that have been presented this evening and the recommendations that the board really thoughtfully consider. We have to be smart about how we proceed. There's much work that we as a district want to do for very, very good reasons. We just have to be sure that obviously it's sustainable. Thank you very much.
Indy?
Yes. Hello, commissioners. My name is Indy McCasey. I'm the executive director of the Arts Education Alliance in the Bay Area. And I just wanted to extend my support of these recommendations that Sam and Edwin are putting forth, and also just wanted to thank them both. And I just also wanted to name just how much as a partner with the school district, with the arts department around the SFUSD Arts Community Collaborative, we've really appreciated the transparency that's being modeled in collaboration with community members. And I just hope to see this kind of work continue across the district. I know many other departments are working to engage community members, but specific examples, like we have student interns who are leading community and community building activities at these monthly meetings. We have working groups focused on addressing issues that are raised collectively, not only by the arts department, but also surfaced by community members and students. And so again, we hope that you'll, follow these recommendations, adopt the arts equity plan, and and continue to work to collaborate and make SFUSD even more creative and just moving forward. Thank you.
That's it, Commissioner.
Thank you so much to the public and for your comments. Commissioner Sanchez?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Edwin. Sam, I'm so very impressed with the work your team is doing. It's incredible. You're moving the needle toward having a more equitable approach towards arts for our students. And so I'm just extremely impressed with that work. I have a question about why we look at physical education and sports as separate line items instead of having like a physical education / athletics budget. I'm just wondering if that's always been the case, that it's been bifurcated, or why we do that.
I think given that decision was made before I arrived too. This is only like year 4 for me too. So I'm gonna ask Deputy Lee if he has any historical information he might want to share.
And Laini might too.
Ms. Matamity, do you want to go first? I'll
follow you. Please go ahead.
Okay. So if you look at the percentages, Commissioner, I'll say it's a bit of a tweener in my, as far as I see it. So when PEEF was first approved by San Francisco voters back in 2004, the first fiscal year that funds were implemented, of course, at a much smaller seed amount, and it's grown ever since then, we're happy to say. So in the first years of PEEF, there was a percentage for arts, for physical education and athletics, and libraries, and each of those sets of programs received 1/3 of the SLAM funds. And so that was the case for several years. And, in those years, athletics and physical education were obviously their programs are different. They have some similar overlapping attributes, but the design of the programs is different in terms of the universality of the participating students, et cetera. So at some point, and I can't remember exactly what year, there was sort of a recognition as the funds were growing that there was, I'll just say collectively, a sense that it was appropriate to have more of the resources devoted towards PE versus athletics, because more students were served through PE, given that athletics is an it's an important but smaller scale program in terms of the number of students that are served, and so they've always sort of been complementary of each other, and the percentages have shifted a bit over time. So that's why you see athletics at 12% and physical education at 18%. So together they represent 30% of the total SLAM funding. And then I'll just make one more comment. It's kind of a side point, but the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 distribution of across those programs was shifted, I want to say about 10 years ago, so that it was slightly more weighted towards visual and performing arts. As Mr. Diaz mentioned, that shift was made out of a recognition that there are more disciplines in the arts realm than in the other two components of SLAM. I've probably given you more information than you asked for, but
okay, thank you
for that.
Well, that was helpful background. I didn't know the history of the proportions because I couldn't answer that question, but it's good timing that you asked this because I think it was our last PFAC meeting. We had athletics and PE come and present for that very same question because I personally have had that question. Other PFAC members have had that same question. And the short answer that we got was that PE is considered an academic offering. And as Deputy Superintendent Lee stated, it serves more students, but it's really more quote unquote skill development is what we heard versus teaching of sports. So if you visit a PE classroom, it may be different. It's different than how when I was learning, when I was a kid, it was sports, some warm-ups and then you did sports. So a lot of times, even if you're learning basketball, you're not actually playing basketball. You're learning the skills of various aspects of handling a basketball that are part of the academic curriculum. Whereas athletics follows separate and is more considered a extracurricular activity. And one of the questions that we had as a CAC is, how can PE, because I do think that there ought to be some coordination, and how can PE to help develop pathways for our students interested in athletics. So to me, that still is an open question because I do have personally observed, my focus group of one has observed that a lot of the kids that go on to athletics in middle school or high school are those that have been participating in outside sports, paid for by families or, other after school enrichment programs offered elsewhere. And so that was the question that remains unanswered, but they are two separate, distinctly separate things.
Okay. Thank you, Laini. Thank you, Myung. Well, the investment has paid off, right, Myung? I mean, over the years with P funding for PE as well as athletics, we keep winning, which is awesome for our district and our city and civic pride. I do want to follow up on fully funding the art teachers at the elementary sites, and I just want to have more of a discussion about that. One idea I have is to get the ball rolling, so to speak, is to maybe start off with our high potential schools and fund those first as we roll it out. And also just kind of a question I have is, do we understand or know how many elementary schools are able to fund their own art teachers and where they lie in the scale of our tier schools?
Yes, so thank you for those questions. I can definitely speak to the idea of focusing on our higher needs schools first, say our pitch schools, and then I'll move to the point of which schools can fund their own. As far as focusing on a phased approach where we would potentially fund it for our high needs schools first, let's just say for a hypothetical in a conversation, the problem that it creates is contractual because we already did the analysis of, if let's say I take 10 of our existing arts teachers now and I assign them each to a school site full time, then that displaces and bumps several arts teachers who are currently at those sites, and I have to place them. But then if I do that again the following year for 10 more, then it's going to bump the same people again, and you have people moving school sites every year. And so that's why we would need to, for the sake of contract and the sake of our arts teachers and the relationships with the sites, we would need to identify the funding for all of them.
Okay.
And then for as far as what schools can afford to fund their own teachers, as you know, several of our schools already add in additional funding for them to have a full-time art teacher or a full-time music teacher. But I'm not able to do an analysis of which schools could afford to make that happen versus which ones wouldn't. And I think it would be great discussion to talk about how we could do that in an equitable way to make it happen.
Okay, I'm really interested in learning more about, exactly which schools have that capacity and are using that capacity to fulfill more arts programming. But I guess I can imagine who they are, which ones they are. And I can guess which schools don't have that capacity. But I'd like to know for sure. And then I still think we need to have some kind of way of serving our most struggling students. I know there's contractual issues, but maybe we can get a little more creative. So let's think more on this. But I do think it's an imperative. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Commissioner Sanchez, I just also want to agree about the opportunities to really look at, how we would go approaching sustainable funding. I had also the idea, would it be a phase in, but that's super helpful, Sam, to hear about just contractually and what that would mean. So a second, also Commissioner Sanchez, recommendation is just understanding which schools, doing a deeper dive there. I think one aspect for me is to make sure that we see a multi-year projection out. So right now it says total anticipated cost annual is 1 year. I would love to see that minimum of 3, and knowing that each year, right, my assumption is the personnel costs would increase because of our commitments to our staff. So just would want to also be realistic in that. I'm going to try to be really consistent about wanting to see a minimum of 3, if not 5 years. Particularly, this is going to be a structural change, a systemic change that we're looking to shift around equal access to art and music. So I appreciate also how you lifted up about, while it's not a full-on like halting, it is about how do we look at creative potential of funding, and just to reiterate again how much it is importance of that it would be multi-year secure of those dollars. So with that, I do also have a question related to the SLAM portion. I just want to also name, I'm a big sports mom. And so I do, just for staff here, and also for the PFAC members and for staff, I would love to be able to see, and Laini, I really appreciate how you talked about that kind of continuum from physical education to sports, because sports has plays such an important role in a young person's life, anywhere from, how to do teamwork, integrating in different social groups that you otherwise would never had a chance to, build peer groups with. And in San Francisco, although we have been winning championships, I think we could win more, because there are some skills gaps actually in certain, sports, right? So for example, tennis has traditionally not had as many children of color, right, playing in tennis. And there are particular sports that I think, so this isn't for the discussion tonight, but certainly would want to raise with the athletics department to really also kind of go through some of that analysis of engagement, both in upper elementary, middle, so that when they get to high school, then, there is that opportunity and a young person really feels like, I have a chance, I have a way to also be part of that, the opportunities there in those activities. So just wanted to be explicit about that, my thinking there around the athletics, because I do see that certainly I know the carryover is probably due to the pandemic, and we're still going through some of the challenges there right now, and getting our sports at full operations. But overall, certainly I voted to support the Arts Equity Plan, and, just for process tonight, because the board had already approved it, the next step is really the funding. And so at this tonight there is no action that's required, but I think this all goes into a broader discussion around for this upcoming spring, what goes into our budget planning, and we will go back for a second reading of the plan itself, not the funding, but the overall plan back to the full board is my understanding. And please staff correct me if I'm off base there. See some head nods. Okay, I captured as far as our process of next steps. So encourage commissioners, if you have additional ideas or thoughts or please reach out to Director Bass as well as the overall budgeting team of where this arc is in the coming months. Okay. I think with that, thank you for hanging in. I again, really appreciate, I know that we had, put these two really important agenda items to January, but I hope you feel that we got the lengthy discussion and data and information that we need to carry the work forward. And so with that, this concludes our first budget and business services of 2022, and we will return back in February. Again, it will be a standing first Wednesday of the month. So our next scheduled, I believe, is it the 2nd?
February 2nd, yes.
Thank you. Same time, 4 o'clock. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. And